Hello again, this is Jason with SlackTech, and in this video segment we're going to talk about webbing. I mean, what's slacklining without webbing after all? And we're actually going to break this down into two different video segments. In the first one, we're going to primarily talk about the mechanical properties of webbing, and then in the second video we're actually going to get more into detail with the different types of webbing, whether it's nylon, polyester, or high-tech fibers, and actually what that means in terms of your walking experience. But for now, we're going to focus on the mechanical properties. And the first property we're going to talk to is strength. All right? Typical webbings, and there's a bunch out there, range in strength from 4,000 pounds to roughly 15,000 pounds. All right? Your tubular webbings, your mil spec or your climb spec that you're able to get at REIs or your standard retailers have a standard breaking strength or a breaking strength of roughly 4,000 pounds to 4,500 pounds. These are great for backyard slacklines, stuff in the park, because they don't have a high breaking strength. And they also have a really great feel. When we start talking into long lining and high lining, it might be a little bit wiser to go with a higher strength webbing, such as your slackline specific webbings. Another thing that goes into effect is stretch. Stretch is important. Stretch really relates to the elasticity of the line and how much pulley you're actually going to have to take out until you get to your actual walking tension. Tubular nylon has some of the highest stretch, around 20%, whereas when you get into your high-tech fibers, like your Dynemas and your Vectrans, those are closer to 1 or 2%. When you start looking for webbings that are in that middle ground, the 7 to 8,000 pounds, we start looking at our flat nylon webbings and our flat polyester webbings that have been specifically designed for slackline use. Weight is another thing. Typical webbings range from 35 grams per meter, with your climb spec and mil spec, up to 70 grams per meter, more for your slackline specific webbings. This has a huge factor in terms of controllability and your overall walking experience. For instance, if you want a heavier webbing, it's going to take a lot more core strength and stability versus a lighter webbing, just because there's less mass to move around. All right? Construction is also another big thing. Here we have two pretty good examples of different weave constructions. These are both polyester webbings, but you can see that this webbing has a very big weave construction. This one has a slightly finer weave construction. And this sort of thing actually has a pretty significant effect in terms of when you're falling a lot and you're catching. Some might be a little bit more abrasive, some might be a little bit less abrasive. It's just part of the characteristics. You can also look at rounded edges versus non-rounded edges. Those actually have a big role when you're training and practicing and catching a lot. You don't want to make as many sacrifices as you have to, because over time they add up. You can get small abrasions on your lacerations on your arms and whatnot, and your knee pits. So it's just something to be aware of when you're really projecting and training. The core construction is also another big thing, and different manufacturers have different methods for their core construction. It's really just dependent on the manufacturer and the brand. Then you can also look at resin coatings. Some different webbings, especially the slackline specific webbings, have resin coatings that protect against additional abrasion and UV degradation. So when we actually talk about abrasion and UV degradation, that's actually a really great segue into failure modes, because one of the biggest things that we want to protect against, hands down, is abrasion. Because if we're on a slack line, whether it's a high line, long line, a little park line, whatever, we want to minimize abrasion on our webbing, because that's gonna play a huge factor in the lifetime or the longevity of your webbing. Okay, the more you abrade it, the less strength it's going to retain. The quicker you're going to have to retire it. Okay, UV degradation is also a concern. If you're leaving your webbing out for long periods of time in the sun, it's going to be a little bit more subject to UV rays and degradation over time. Chemicals is another big thing. This is one thing that we learned in the rock climbing world pretty early on, how susceptible nylon and other fibers can be to chemicals such as gasoline, petroleum products, battery acid, heck, even other little cosmetics or household chemicals can all have a huge role in the degradation of your webbing. So you really want to prevent any sort of contact with anything besides essentially water. Okay. So when we look at the failure modes, the best way to protect against that when the webbing is not in use is proper care. So when we store our webbing, we want to store it in a cool, dry place where there's no mold. You know, the webbing, if you've been water lining, you want to make sure to try to dry it out as best as possible, get any salt water out of it. And some actual rope companies make detergents especially for ropes that don't have any detrimental effects to it, so you can actually go and clean your rope or your webbing. So those are kind of like some of the key mechanical properties, failure modes, and care procedures or practices that are, you know, essentially best practice. So in this next video, we're going to actually start talking about, you know, what these strength, stretch, weight, and construction actually mean in terms of your overall slacklining and walking experience.